What's up everyone? Alex here. The Fate franchise is an entity of monolithic proportions, one that has manifested a variety of media. It's understandable to feel as if Fate has become too impenetrable. And as if by fate, I'm here to tell you that not only does Fate Samurai Remnant act as a surprisingly smooth entry point for newcomers, but it stands completely on its own as an incredibly solid game. Fate Samurai Remnant takes place during 1651 in Heian-era Japan. Our protagonist is Iori Musashi, who finds himself wrapped in a magical battle royale called the Waxing Moon Ritual, wherein 7 masters summon a respective servant. The servants, known as heroic spirits, are powerful figures of either historical or mythical importance. Part of the fun of Fate Samurai Remnant, and by extension, the Fate franchise, is trying to figure out the identities of these mythological entities. In fact, Iori himself remains largely unaware of who his own heroic spirit is for the majority of the game. This leads to an interesting dynamic, wherein Iori and his servant Saber forge a shaky partnership that slowly builds over time. I found this to be one of the more compelling aspects of the game's story, and it was genuinely fun to see the two of them banter with each other and grow more attached as the simmering animosity gradually fades away. Saber, in particular, starts off as dismissive of Iori, but by the end of the game, you can feel how much their relationship has grown. Not to be outdone, the rest of the cast manages to be quite colorful and lively. Each master and servant duo have their own unique dynamic, and are interesting in their own right, whether it's the strange tension between Lancer and her master Chiyamon, or the nobility of Yue Shusetsu, complemented by the stoic nature of Ryder. There's just something fascinating about not just the characters in and of themselves, but how they interact with each other. This is compounded by whenever Iori and Saber are forced to do battle with them, resulting in conflicting scenarios and even mixed feelings for the player. This is a battle royale after all, so no matter how much you may personally like the other masters and servants, they all must be defeated. Sadly, while the characters remain consistently engaging, the same cannot be said for the overarching plot. Don't get me wrong, when Fate Samurai Remnant story is good, it's very good. Of particular note would be the fantastic looking cutscenes that truly elevate the storytelling and do well on selling just how powerful the heroic spirits are and how destructive their clashes can be. However, this is a game of many peaks and valleys, with the highest memorable and attention-grabbing. But most of the narrative lies within the low valleys of banal fetch questing and menial tasks that come across as padding before the next big plot point. At times, it made the game feel aimless, like it was just going through the motions before something big and bombastic happened, rather than properly building up to those more eye-catching moments. While the story is still a net positive given the solid character writing and interesting setup, there was still a pang of disappointment given how uneven of an experience it ended up being in this regard. Thankfully, the rest of the game manages to be far more consistent, as one would expect from Omega Force. What you might not expect, however, is that despite being developed by the same team responsible for the Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors series, Fate Samurai Remnant is not a Musou game in the traditional sense. Rather than going from battlefield to battlefield, mowing down thousands upon thousands of foes, the Samurai Remnant structure strikes a careful balance of exploration mixed with combat, performing side quests, minor crafting, and deliberating on what ways to level your characters. Instead of the familiar Musou-style battlefields, Fate Samurai Remnant will have you running around several Japanese towns and settlements where you can purchase supplies and, most importantly of all, pet some adorable pups and kittens. Truly the most vital feature of the entire game. During this phase of exploration, however, you can also engage in small skirmishes that typically consist of a wave or two of enemies. And when I compare this to any Musou game before, I had only defeated a few thousand enemies by the end of the game. And that can sound like a lot, but considering you could quite easily rack up 10 times that many kills in something like Samurai Warriors 5, it's easier to appreciate how de-emphasized the enemy count has become. By taking this approach, Fate Samurai Remnant ends up feeling more like a traditional action RPG and not a Musou title. When talking about the combat itself, however, this is where things get interesting. You mainly play as Iori Musashi for about 90% of your playtime, and given how much of the experience focuses on him, Iori goes from having 2 distinct fighting styles up to a total of 5, which helps keep the gameplay fresh. Each element drastically alters how he fights. Water, being the fastest, is best for evasive maneuvers. Earth focuses on defense for when you need to stand your ground. Wind is magic-based and great for crowd control. Fire has the slowest but strongest attacks. And finally, Void, which is arguably the best of all, is only effective if you can maintain your health properly. Given that these styles are earned through advancing the main campaign, it provides a natural push for the player to progress in the story. Another benefit of Iori unlocking these styles is that they expand his skill tree. On top of earning passive buffs that increase his stats, he can also learn entirely new abilities, further expanding his toolkit during battle. The most observant viewers might have noticed that I mentioned earlier that Iori is playable 90% of the time. But what about the other 10? That's because he's not always alone, as Saber is almost always accompanying him. And once their meter is filled by defeating enemies, Saber becomes playable for a short time. On top of that, a second heroic spirit can accompany Iori and can be playable in the same way. There are also special segments in the game that allow you to take full control of a totally different heroic spirit, with no explicit time limit. Given that Iori is just a regular human at the end of the day, getting to play as Saber, Lancer, Berserker, and all of the other playable servants really feels like a power fantasy, as they're the strongest characters in the game. And while I do enjoy playing our protagonist for the most part, it can't be denied that these powerhouses are the most fun to play, with Lancer being my favorite. In the end, Fate Samurai Remnant is a fun game with a memorable cast and solid combat. It's a standalone experience that requires no prior knowledge of the Fate franchise in order to enjoy. And because of that, Fate Samurai Remnant can make it easier for interested parties to use this as a stepping stone into getting into the larger franchise. That said, if you are a Fate fan, there's a lot of cheeky nods, familiar characters, and nostalgic callbacks to enjoy. If you've ever wanted to play as a certain heroic spirit, or just wanted to play a solid action RPG, or an excuse to see just what the heck the Fate franchise is all about, Fate Samurai Remnant more than adequately satisfies all of these needs.